My name is Aitana Townsend, and this is the story of how I reclaimed what was stolen from me. But it begins not with a victory, but with a public execution. Julian Croft stood on a brightly lit stage in a Soho art gallery, his smug smile reflecting in 100 camera lenses. He thought he was burying a relic of the past that night. He had no idea he was planting the seeds of his own destruction, watered by a promise he never knew existed. In 5 days, he would be on his knees, begging for the very thing he was about to cast aside. The air in the gallery was thick with the scent of expensive champagne and calculated ambition. It was the launch of what Julian, the new CEO and grandson of the founder of House of Croft, was calling the new era. I stood in the shadows at the back of the room, a ghost at my own funeral. The stark white walls and minimalist sculptures felt cold, alien, a perfect reflection of the brand's new soul. For 50 years, House of Croft had been a sanctuary of artistry, a name synonymous with perfumes that were stories captured in glass. Now, it was just another brand hungry for market share. "We must evolve," Julian announced into the microphone, his voice smooth and practiced. He wore a tailored suit that probably cost more than my first year's salary. "We honor the past, but we are not chained to it. Our vision is forward, dynamic, and data-driven." He paused for effect, letting the words hang in the air. I saw Isabella Vance, his sharp, cruel director of marketing, give him a slight nod from the side of the stage. She was the architect of this coup, her mind a fortress of spreadsheets and trend reports. "That is why," Julian continued, "we are restructuring our creative leadership. We are moving away from the traditional, singular vision of a nose and embracing a more collaborative, modern approach." He didn't say my name, but every eye in the room darted towards me. He didn't have to. I was the singular vision. I was the tradition. To spearhead this change, we're proud to announce our partnership with Aura, a revolutionary AI algorithm that will help us craft the sense of tomorrow for the consumer of today. A wave of polite, confused applause rippled through the audience of influencers and journalists. An AI perfumer. It was an insult so profound, so utterly dismissive of the human soul required to create true art that I almost laughed. They were replacing a lifetime of passion and intuition with a string of code. As Julian wrapped up his speech, a junior assistant in a black dress materialized at my side. Her eyes were full of pity. She held out a sleek tablet. "Ms. Townsend," she whispered, "this is your severance agreement. Mr. Croft asked me to give it to you." I looked from her nervous face to the screen where a sterile legal document glowed. I didn't touch it. I turned my gaze back to the stage where Julian and Isabella were now mingling, accepting congratulations. I saw Julian glance over at me, a flicker of triumph in his eyes. He expected tears, a scene, an argument. I would give him none of it. I gave the assistant a small, calm smile. "Thank you," I said, my voice even. Then I turned and walked out of the gallery. The click of my heels on the polished concrete floor was the only sound that mattered in my world. Each step was a beat, a countdown. As the cold New York air hit my face, a genuine smile finally touched my lips. The fools, they hadn't just fired me, they had just armed me. The game wasn't over. It had just begun. Leo Martinez, my young, brilliant apprentice, caught up to me on the sidewalk. His face was flushed with anger. "Aitana, this is insane. An AI? They're turning the lab into a factory." "You can't let them." "I'm not," I said, hailing a cab. "Get in, Leo." In the taxi, speeding through the glittering streets of Manhattan, I laid out the first pieces of the plan. "Leo, I need to know everything they do with my formulas, especially Ethelgard," whisper. His eyes widened. "The masterpiece, they wouldn't dare." "They will," I said. "Julian sees a product, not a poem. He will try to simplify it, cheapen it, and mass-produce it. I need you to be my eyes and ears. Document everything. Every change, every memo, every test. Can you do that?" He nodded, his jaw set with determination. "For you, Aitana, for Mr. Croft, I'll do it." The next morning, I returned to my lab at the House of Croft headquarters for the last time. It wasn't just a workspace, it was my sanctuary. The air still held the ghosts of 1,000 experiments, faint notes of Bulgarian rose, Haitian vetiver, and oud from Laos. I packed my personal belongings into a simple cardboard box. A well-worn copy of Perfume, the story of a murderer, a collection of rare, essential oils that were my private palette, and a small, framed photo of me and Ethelgard Croft, the company's founder, taken years ago in the grass lavender fields. His eyes were kind, and they held a spark of genius that his grandson, Julian, could never hope to understand. I deliberately left behind all the project files and formulation notes for the commercial products I had developed. Let them have those. They were work, but my soul, my real work, was coming with me. As two security guards watched me with awkward sympathy, I sealed the box. They thought they were escorting a disgraced employee out of the building. In reality, they were witnessing the quiet theft of the company's entire future. That evening, in the quiet of my apartment, I retrieved a beautiful, antique box made of dark walnut wood. It had been a gift from Ethelgard on my 10th anniversary with the company. I had always kept it on my bookshelf, a treasured memento, but it was more than that. It was a time capsule, a failsafe. Inside, beneath a layer of velvet, was my original employment contract from 15 years ago, and stapled to the back, almost like an afterthought, was a single page, written on Ethelgard's personal stationery. The paper was thick and creamy, and the ink from his fountain pen had faded slightly. At the top, he had written two words, the Artistic Heritage Clause. I had almost forgotten its exact wording. My hands trembled slightly as I read the lines he and I had crafted with his personal lawyer all those years ago. It was a simple, powerful declaration. It stated that any fragrance I developed that was deemed a work of significant artistic legacy, a category to be determined by me and Mr. Croft, would have its formula remain my exclusive intellectual property. The House of Croft would be granted the exclusive license to produce and sell it, but only under the condition that the final product met my unwavering standard of quality and artistic integrity. Any modification to the formula without my written consent would render the licensing agreement null and void. At the bottom was his signature, bold and unwavering, next to my own. And listed as the first and only creation under this clause was the name, Ethelgard, whisper. A cold, sharp clarity washed over me. Julian and Isabella, in their arrogant rush to erase me, had committed a fatal error. They had looked at my employment file, seen the standard corporate contracts, and assumed that was all there was. They had never bothered to look in the archives, to understand the foundational agreements made by the man whose name they were so eager to slap onto cheap, synthetic fragrances. They assumed they owned the formula to Ethelgard's whisper. They were wrong. It was mine. And they were about to violate the terms of its use in the most spectacular way possible. My revenge would not be emotional or petty. It would be contractual. It would be absolute. The story of that clause began 15 years ago, when the House of Croft was dying. After Ethelgard's semi-retirement, the board had brought in a CEO who chased trends. The brand, once a beacon of luxury, started producing generic, celebrity-endorsed scents that smelled like candy and desperation. The stock price plummeted. Loyal customers fled. The soul of the company was rotting away. I was a junior perfumer back then, working in a cramped lab in the basement, a space the executives had forgotten existed. I watched the decay with a broken heart. One afternoon, Ethelgard, who still visited once a week like a worried ghost, found me surrounded by hundreds of scent strips, trying to perfect a formula no one had asked for. "What is this, my dear Aitana?" He had asked, his voice a gentle rumble. "It's a memory," I told him. "I'm trying to create the scent of your childhood garden in Provence, the one you always told me about. The wild lavender after a rainstorm, the lemon trees, the hint of your father's pipe tobacco in the air." For 2 years, I had labored on that scent. It became my obsession. I sourced a rare, wild lavender from a remote mountain slope. I found a small family farm in Sicily that grew the most fragrant lemons I had ever encountered. It was more than a perfume. It was the distillation of a man's soul, a tribute to the founder. When I finally presented the first finished sample to Ethelgard, he put a single drop on his wrist, closed his eyes, and wept. "You have done it," he whispered. "You have given me back a piece of my life." He named it Ethelgard, whisper. He knew the soulless board and his own ambitious grandson Julian would never understand it. They would try to change it to make it cheaper, more commercial. So he protected it. He protected me. We signed the Artistic Heritage Clause, a sacred pact between two artists. The formula was to be my legacy, entrusted to his company. It was the ultimate expression of his faith in me. Now, that faith was about to become my sword. Julian wasn't just breaking a contract. He was desecrating a tomb. He was trying to steal a ghost, and I was about to show him, and the entire world, that this ghost had teeth. My plan was simple. I would let them walk straight into the trap Ethelgard and I had set 15 years ago. I would let them invest millions in a product they had no right to make. I would let them announce a launch date, build the hype, and get the entire industry watching. And then, at the moment of their greatest pride, I would pull the rug out from under them, using the very legacy they sought to destroy. My first move was to call Leo. We met the next morning at a small, anonymous coffee shop in Brooklyn, far from the polished world of Midtown Manhattan. He slid into the booth opposite me, looking like he hadn't slept. He pushed a small, plain USB drive across the table. "They're moving faster than I thought," he said, his voice low. "Isabella has already ordered the new chemical compounds. They're gutting it, Tana. They're replacing the heart of the formula." I plugged the drive into my laptop. On the screen were internal lab memos, purchase orders, and a series of gas chromatography reports. The data was cold, clinical, and utterly damning. They had replaced the wild lavender with a synthetic linalool blend. The Sicilian lemon was gone, substituted with a cheap, harsh citral. The most egregious sin was the tobacco absolute, a keynote that gave the fragrance its soul, which they had replaced with a generic, smoky molecule that was flat and lifeless. A final report from the quality control department, which Isabella had clearly ignored, flagged the new formulation as a potential skin irritant. "They're not just making a cheaper version," I murmured, scrolling through the data. "They're making poison and calling it Perfume." "They've renamed it Croft Modernity," Leo added, his voice laced with disgust. "Isabella said it tested better with focus groups. Julian is planning a massive launch in 6 weeks. He's betting the company's entire fourth quarter on it." "He's betting on a product he doesn't own with a formula that's a dangerous fraud," I said, a cold fire spreading through my veins. I saved the files, my mind already calculating the next step. "Thank you, Leo. You're putting yourself at great risk." "The only risk," he said, looking me straight in the eye, "is letting them get away with this." My next call was to Sophia Rossi. Her name was legendary in the world of intellectual property law. She was known as a dragon slayer, a lawyer who represented artists, inventors, and creators against corporate giants. Her office, overlooking Central Park, was a testament to her success. It was sleek, modern, and radiated an aura of quiet, unshakable power. I laid out the story, placing the antique contract and the USB drive on her polished glass desk. She listened without interruption, her intelligent eyes scanning every document. She read Ethelgard's clause twice, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Ms. Townsend," she said, leaning back in her chair, "this isn't a contract. It's a work of art. Ethelgard Croft didn't just give you a job, he gave you a fortress." She picked up the USB drive. "And with this, you've just handed me the cannon to put on top of it. They're not just in breach of contract. This data suggests they're engaging in willful misrepresentation and consumer fraud. They are planning to sell a demonstrably inferior and potentially harmful product under the legacy of a name they are actively destroying." The validation in her voice was like a balm on my wounded spirit. "So what do we do?" I asked. "We don't just ask them to stop," Sophia said, her eyes glinting. "We command it. We will draft a formal cease and desist notification. It will be delivered to their entire board of directors, not just their legal department. We will state, in no uncertain terms, that the formula for Ethelgard's Whisper is your exclusive property, that their planned product, Croft Modernity, is an unauthorized, adulterated derivative, and that any attempt to manufacture, market, or sell it will result in immediate legal action seeking maximum damages." 2 days later, the letter was sent. The silence that followed was deafening. For 48 hours, nothing happened. I imagined the panic spreading through the executive suites, the frantic calls between Julian, Isabella, and their lawyers. The arrogance of youth often mistakes silence for weakness. They thought I was making a desperate threat. The response, when it came, was exactly what Sophia had predicted. A call from Harrison Wade, the head of House of Croft's legal team, a man known for his blustering, intimidating tactics. Sophia took the call on speakerphone in her office so I could listen. "Sophia," Wade's voice boomed, dripping with condescension. "I'm looking at this letter from your client. It's creative, but let's be serious. Tana Townsend was an employee. Her work is the property of the company. This little artistic clause is a sentimental note from a dying man. It's legally unenforceable, and you know it." Sophia's voice, in contrast, was as calm and sharp as a shard of ice. "Harrison, I have a signed witness document that says otherwise, a document your own founder commissioned. Furthermore, I have chemical analysis proving that your client, Mr. Croft, is planning to defraud the public by selling a cheap knockoff under a prestige label. That's not a sentimental issue. That's a federal trade issue." Wade scoffed. "You're bluffing. You have nothing." "Then I invite you to proceed with your product launch," Sophia said sweetly. "And I will enjoy deposing Mr. Croft and Ms. Vance about exactly when they decided to replace authentic rose oil with a chemical that could cause a rash. I'm sure the press will find that fascinating." She hung up. The gauntlet had been thrown. Now, I needed to escalate. I needed to remind them of the man they had betrayed. I called Beatrice Vance, the company's former archivist and Ethelgard's closest confidant before she retired. Beatrice was in her 80s, living quietly in a small town upstate, but her mind was as sharp as ever. I told her what Julian was doing. Her gasp was followed by a long, sorrowful silence. "That boy has his grandfather's name, but not his heart," she finally said. Ethelgard feared this. He knew Julian saw beauty only as a number on a balance sheet. She paused. "Aitana, years ago, Ethelgard gave an interview for the company archives. It was never released. He spoke about you, about the future. I have the tape. I think you should have it." The next day, a package arrived. Inside was a small, old cassette tape. I had to buy a player just to listen to it. In the quiet of my living room, I pressed play, and the air filled with Ethelgard's voice, warm and resonant, a voice from the past speaking directly to the present. "The soul of this company is not in its marketing budget," he said. "It is in the hands of the artist. People like Aitana Townsend, she is not just an employee. She is an heir, not to my money, but to my spirit. Ethelgard, Whisper, is more than a perfume. It is my legacy, and I have placed its protection in her hands. I trust her to defend it against the merchants, the committees, the men who think art can be designed by a focus group. It is her creation, and its integrity must be absolute." Tears streamed down my face. It was his blessing. It was his testimony from beyond the grave. I immediately had the audio digitized. This was no longer just a legal document. It was a moral imperative. But the final, devastating piece of evidence came from Leo. He called me late one night, his voice a panicked whisper. "You won't believe this. They had an emergency meeting after your lawyer's letter. Julian, Isabella, and the head of production. They left the conference room's recording system on by accident. I have the file." He sent it. I listened, my blood turning to ice. Julian's voice was clear, arrogant, and utterly damning. "I don't care what some old piece of paper says," he was ranting. "Wade thinks she has a case? Fine, we'll drown her in legal fees. We're moving forward. By the time she can get an injunction, we'll have sold millions of units. The money will already be in the bank." Then came Isabella's voice, cold and reptilian. "We just rebrand the narrative. We say the formula was updated for a modern consumer. More stable, longer lasting. We can even say it's hypoallergenic. No one will ever know the difference." "Exactly," Julian said. "Put a rush on production. I want the first batch bottled by the end of the month. As for Aitana Townsend, she's about to learn what happens when you stand in the way of progress." I sat there in the darkness, the recording playing on a loop. This was it, the ultimate proof. It was no longer a dispute about a contract. It was a conspiracy, a deliberate, calculated plan to commit fraud, to lie to the public, and to crush me. Sophia was ecstatic. "It's a gift," she said when I played it for her. "This is the bullet that takes down the king. With this, we don't just win, we annihilate them." Our strategy shifted. Sophia began to strategically, anonymously leak information to two of the older, more respected members of the board of directors, men who had known and admired Ethelgard. We didn't send them the full recording, just a hint that a damaging one existed. We sent them a transcript of Ethelgard's interview from the archives. We wanted to plant seeds of doubt, to create a schism between the board and their reckless young CEO. The effect was immediate. Rumors began to swirl in the financial press about a major intellectual property dispute at House of Croft. The stock, which had been climbing in anticipation of the new launch, began to falter. Julian, trapped in his own echo chamber of arrogance, doubled down, issuing a press release that promised the most exciting product launch in the company's history. He was throwing a party, unaware that the building was on fire. Finally, the panicked call came from Harrison Wade to Sophia's office. The board was demanding a meeting. They wanted to hear my terms. They wanted to prevent a lawsuit that could destroy the company's reputation forever. The meeting was set for the following Tuesday, in the main boardroom on the top floor of the Croft building, 1 week before the scheduled launch of Croft Modernity. As I prepared for that meeting, I looked at the photo of me and Ethelgard. I wasn't just a woman who had been fired. I was a custodian of a legacy. I was the keeper of a promise. And I was walking back into that building not as a victim, but as an executioner. The trial was over. I was there to deliver the sentence. The boardroom felt like a coliseum. A long, imposing table of polished mahogany sat under a low-hanging chandelier, reflecting the tense faces of the House of Croft's board of directors. Julian and Isabella were there, seated at the far end, trying to project an aura of confidence they clearly didn't feel. Their usual smirks were gone, replaced by tight defensive lines. Sophia and I took our seats directly opposite them, the polished wood between us a battlefield. Margaret Walsh, the chairwoman of the board, a formidable woman in her late 60s who had served alongside Ethelgard for decades, called the meeting to order. Her expression was grim. "We are here to resolve this matter before it inflicts irreparable damage on this company. Ms. Rossi, we have reviewed your initial letter. The board is prepared to offer Ms. Townsend a generous settlement to release her claims." Sophia smiled, a surgeon's smile, precise and without warmth. "My client is not interested in a settlement, Margaret. She is interested in justice. She is here to offer you terms, not to negotiate them." All eyes turned to me. I felt a strange calm settle over me. This was my stage now. I looked past Julian and Isabella, directly at Margaret and the other board members. "My terms are simple," I began, my voice clear and steady, echoing slightly in the silent room. 1. You will immediately and permanently cease all production, marketing, and sales of the product you are calling Croft Modernity. All existing stock will be destroyed. A muscle twitched in Julian's jaw. 2. The House of Croft will issue a public apology to me for my wrongful termination and for the attempt to misappropriate my work. The apology will state clearly that I am the sole creator and owner of the formula for Ethelgard, whisper. Isabella's face paled. 3. I will be reinstated not as an employee, but as the company's first ever chief artistic officer with a permanent seat on this board. My role will be to oversee the integrity of all creative output, with final veto power over any new fragrance. A low murmur went through the room. This was unprecedented. And 4, I said, delivering the final blow. The company will move forward with the launch of Ethelgard, whisper, using the original, unadulterated formula under my direct supervision. It will be launched not as a mass-market product, but as the work of art it was always intended to be. Julian finally exploded. "This is absurd," he shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "She has no right. She's trying to hold this company hostage based on some sentimental piece of paper. We are a modern corporation, not an artist's charity. Your definition of a modern corporation seems to involve consumer fraud," Sophia interjected smoothly. She placed a small digital audio player on the table. "Before the board makes a decision, perhaps they'd like to hear your thoughts on progress, Mr. Croft, in your own words." Julian's face went from red to ashen. He knew what was on that player. "That's enough," Margaret Walsh said, her voice like steel. She looked at Julian with pure contempt. "We don't need to hear it. Your recklessness has brought this company to the brink of humiliation." I wasn't finished. I turned my gaze on Julian. "You call my work sentimental? Let me tell you what that sentimental formula is. It's the result of 2 years of artistry. It's a rare lavender that only blooms for 3 weeks a year on one hillside in Provence. It's a lemon oil from a Sicilian family that has been growing them for 200 years. Your version," I said, my voice dripping with disdain, "is a cocktail of cheap chemicals synthesized in a lab in New Jersey. One of which, according to your own internal documents, failed a dermal sensitivity test. You weren't just stealing my work, Julian. You were willing to put your family's name, your grandfather's legacy, on a product that could literally harm your customers, all for a few extra points on your profit margin." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. The other board members stared at Julian, their expressions a mixture of shock and disgust. He had gambled with their reputation, with the very soul of the brand, and he had lost. Margaret Walsh made her decision. "Julian Croft and Isabella Vance, you are both dismissed from this company, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. The words were a death sentence. Isabella stood up, gathered her things with a shaking hand, and walked out of the room without a word. Julian remained seated for a moment, his face a mask of disbelief. He looked at me, his eyes full of a hatred so pure it was almost pitiable. Then he, too, stood and was escorted out by a waiting guard. The coup was over. Margaret turned to me. "Ms. Townsend Aitana, the board accepts all of your terms. On behalf of this company, I offer you our most profound apology. We have been blind. We allowed ourselves to be led astray by the promise of easy profits, and we forgot what made this house great in the first place. Welcome back." The victory felt surreal. In the elevator ride down, Sophia squeezed my arm. "You didn't just win a case," she said. "You staged a revolution." The aftermath was swift and decisive. Within a week, Julian and Isabella were facing a lawsuit from a group of shareholders for breach of fiduciary duty. The press, smelling blood, ran stories about the failed coup, hailing me as the guardian of the brand's legacy. The narrative of Croft modernity died, and the legend of Ethelgard's Whisper was born. My first act as chief artistic officer was to rehire Leo Martinez and promote him to head of the laboratory. Together, we dismantled the cost-cutting measures Julian had put in place and restored the lab to its former glory, a place of creation, not just production. I also brought Beatrice Vance back from retirement, appointing her as the company's official historian and brand ambassador. Her presence was a living link to Ethelgard's vision. 6 months later, we launched Ethelgard, Whisper. There was no flashy party in a Soho gallery. Instead, we held an intimate event at the New York Botanical Garden. We didn't invite influencers. We invited perfumers, artists, and journalists who truly understood the craft. I spoke not about market trends, but about the story behind the scent, about Ethelgard's garden, about the importance of preserving artistic integrity in a world obsessed with disposability. The fragrance was a sensation. It received rave reviews not for being trendy, but for being timeless. It became a bestseller not because of a massive marketing campaign, but because it was, quite simply, a masterpiece. It was proof that consumers were hungry for authenticity, for quality, for a story. The profits that followed were far greater than anything Julian's synthetic creation could have ever hoped to achieve. My new beginning wasn't just about reclaiming my position. It was about healing a part of my soul I didn't realize had been so wounded. The bitterness I had felt after my dismissal slowly faded, replaced by a profound sense of purpose. I wasn't just a perfumer anymore. I was a protector, a mentor. I started a new apprenticeship program at House of Croft, seeking out young, talented noses and giving them the creative freedom and resources they needed to flourish. I wanted to build a culture where art was nurtured, not monetized. 1 year after the boardroom showdown, I was walking through the lab. The air was alive with the complex, beautiful scents of dozens of new experiments. Leo was working with a young apprentice, their heads bent together over a series of scent strips, their faces lit with the joy of discovery. Beatrice was in the archives with a group of new hires, telling them the story of Ethelgard Croft, not as a brand name, but as a man. I realized then that my revenge on Julian wasn't the moment he was fired. That was just a consequence. My true victory was this: the sound of laughter in the lab, the scent of genuine creativity in the air, the knowledge that Ethelgard's legacy was not only safe, but was growing, evolving, and inspiring a new generation. I had been forced into a fight I never wanted, but in winning it, I hadn't just gotten my job back. I had rediscovered the reason I fell in love with perfume in the first place. It wasn't about the bottle, or the brand, or the profit. It was about the transcendent power of scent to capture a memory, to tell a story, to touch the human soul. I had been freed from the corporate machine and given the chance to rebuild it into something beautiful. My name is Aitana Townsend, and my work, my true work, has only just begun.